Good afternoon, everyone. This is Meredith Ward with NASCIO. Welcome to the NASCIO Cybersecurity Webinar Series and a special welcome to the NASCIO Cybersecurity Committee folks. This is the Cybersecurity Committee regular time, so we're glad that you've joined us today. So this is the fourth in the Cyber Webinar Series that NASCIO is doing leading up to Cybersecurity Awareness Month. It's just another way that we're celebrating Cybersecurity Awareness Month in October. So we hope that you'll join us for the last webinar. It's on October 2nd. Please feel free to go to nascio.org/cybersecurity and you can find out more information. But on to today. We have a great webinar scheduled today. Today we're going to talk about the Ponemon Institute 2018 Cost of a Data Breach Study. Deb Snyder Sisto from New York is going to introduce our other speakers, but just wanted to tell you a little bit about Deb. Of course, a long-time NASCIO member and CISO for the state of New York, and Deb oversees the Enterprise Information Security Office for New York. She's also a 2014 Thomas Jarrett Cybersecurity Award. That's one of the NASCIO awards that we give out here. And just this year, she was named Center for Women in Government and Civil Society's 40 Changemakers of 2018. So Deb, thanks so much, and I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Meredith, thanks so much for that kind introduction. I appreciate it, and good afternoon, everyone. So I just wanted to start us off by taking a few minutes just to talk about my own personal perspective before I introduce our esteemed panel. From my perspective, an active CISO that has looked at stared down the barrel of just about every type of incident you could possibly predict being faced with, there's a few things that come to mind that I wanted to share, and they're all, you'll say, yep, that's mom, apple pie, and motherhood, and that's all good. But I think these are the things that you need to focus on if you're just starting out or if you've got a mature program that you're running. So preparedness matters, right? Planning, taking the time to actually assess your business risk and the impact of cyber attacks to your organization, knowing where your sensitive data is, not just the obvious places in your trusted system of records, but unstructured data as well. Paying attention to third-party risk, something that New York State has endeavored to take a specific initiative on this year, to track down all of our data sharing agreements, to understand our vendor context and who we share data with, what they use it for, how it's stored and handled, and if our third-party partners are being as careful as we need them to be with the data that is our responsibility to safeguard and protect. Of course, good cyber hygiene, patch your systems, secure configuration, strong asset access and authentication, monitoring your logs. And it's not enough to just monitor or collect logs, better yet, and not monitor. You have to determine and specifically select on events that are suspicious and actionable, and then actually act on them. So resources are always a problem in that area, but if you're not going to act on them, reporting, knowing about them is actually a liability. So I caution you to not only report on the events, but reduce the noise and act on the ones that you deem suspicious and actionable. Put in data loss prevention technologies. Make sure you've got encryption everywhere you have sensitive information. Pay attention to training. You've got to persuade users to do the right thing. They are, in fact, and will always continue to be the hardest element of our infrastructure to harden users. Pay attention to insider threat. In this day and age where heuristics, analytics, correlation analysis are available and readily implementable, identifying undesirable and suspicious user behavior is easier than it ever was before, and there's just no excuse for not doing it. And as cyber professionals, take the time to relate the story to your business customers. And what I mean by that is when a news story comes up, turn that into a story that is fundamentally relatable to your executives at your governor's office level, to your chief financial officer. Tell the story in their terms. This is what it will cost us, CFO. This is what it could expose us to, elected official. Those stories, the ability to convert risk to the story that relates to me as a human being, an executive in government or whatever organization you are, is what helps us make it personal. So without further ado, having shared my views on things, I am going to turn this over to two very special people that I want to introduce to you. Dr. Larry Ponemon. a longtime friend and just a thought leader and expert in the field. I absolutely respect this man so very much. He's the chairman and founder of the Ponemon Institute, a research think tank that's dedicated to advancing privacy, data protection, and information security practices. He's just a pioneer in privacy auditing, and responsible information security management framework is one of the hallmarks of his career. Security Magazine named him one of the most influential people for security. Ponemon Institute is, in case any of you have not heard of it, an independent research facility that educates leaders from private and public sectors and verifies the privacy and data protection practices of organizations in every sector and every industry. In addition to Institute activities, Dr. Ponemon, in his spare time, I don't know where you find it, Larry, is an adjunct professor for ethics and privacy at Carnegie Mellon University's CIO Institute. So welcome, Dr. Ponemon. Megan Powell. Megan is a product marketing manager with IBM Security, and she recently did some amazing work with Dr. Larry Ponemon and his team to bring the cost of a data breach report to market. In addition to managing thought leadership reports for IBM, Megan also manages marketing for the cloud, data and application security, and threat management services. So I'm going to turn the webcast over to these two folks at this moment, and take it away.
Well, thank you, Deborah. I really appreciate that wonderful introduction, and it's a pleasure to join you and your colleagues today. I think what we're going to do is walk through the results of our current study and really determine what is the true cost of a data breach. As you probably know, this particular piece of research has been studied for, I think it's 13 consecutive years. It's hard to believe it's been that long. So anyway, Megan, do you have some opening remarks that you'd like to share?
Yes, thank you. So as Dr. Ponemon mentioned, this is the 13th year his team has conducted this research, and it's the 5th year in a row that IBM Security has sponsored this research. It's independently conducted by the Ponemon Institute, and we're really looking forward today to reviewing the study findings and providing a bit further insight into the data. So the goal of this research is to quantify the economic impact of data breaches and observed cost trends over time. The Ponemon Institute and IBM believe that a better understanding of the cost, of the root causes and factors that influence the cost will help organizations determine the appropriate amount of investment and resources needed to prevent or mitigate the consequences of an attack. So with that, Dr. Ponemon, I'll turn it over to you to go over the demographics information.
Great, thanks. Thank you so much, Megan. And Megan mentioned that this is sponsorship by IBM or sponsored by IBM, but IBM has been a true partner in the very sense of the word. It's been wonderful working with Megan and her team and basically doing this research we call a labor of love because it takes a lot of time. It takes nearly a year to conduct a research cycle on the cost of data breach. So you have to be committed and a little bit crazy to do this. But we love what we do, and we also know it's important to our community at large. Now, in terms of industries, we cover a whole bunch of different industries, 17 to be exact. And clearly, as you look at the donut diagram, financial services and services represent the two largest globally. If you kind of look at the countries, the adjacent donut graph, we basically cover a whole bunch of different countries, country studies, as well as regions. Our largest country study is the United States, followed by the UK, India, Brazil, and then the numbers are a little smaller. And then we also, as I mentioned, in addition to interviews, in addition to country studies, we conduct interviews for each company that participates in our research. And in total, we have well over 2,200 interviews completed to do this project. As I mentioned, a little bit crazy, and it is a labor of love, but we will hopefully continue to do this for many years. The total number, our sample size, folks, is 477. The key word is companies, because when people say, oh, a sample of 477, that's pretty good. But that might be a poll or a survey. When the unit of analysis for this research are companies, and we have a remarkable sample, and it's a true global sample in every sense of that word. Let's go to our next slide.
So we often say that when it comes to experiencing a data breach, the question is not if it happens, but rather when. But what are the actual odds of experiencing a data breach compared to winning the Powerball? that is over 292 million to 1. Your odds of getting struck by lightning are over 1 million, or 1 in a million. Finding a pearl in an oyster is a little bit better, especially if you go pearl diving or oyster diving. That's 12,000 to 1. Or getting audited by the IRS. That's only 160 to 1.
Darn.
Darn. So Larry, over to you.
Yeah, so what does it mean? If you kind of look at the odds, it's 1 in 4 for data breach. So it's actually better to be, I suppose, worried about IRS than worried about data breach. Data breaches happen a lot. They're not just a rare event that happens every century or two. It seems like every day there's a mega data breach, which we define as a data breach of more than 1 million compromised records. But it happens whether it's small amounts of information, sometimes small amounts of high value information. It's not something that we consider a rare event, but it's just the cost of doing business. In terms of the bar chart by country, basically the odds of 1 in 4 does vary by country. In Brazil, not to pick on Brazil, folks, but Brazil is 43%. South Africa, 41%, and you can see the numbers then get lower. At the very bottom of the list, which is actually good, right? Because you don't want to have data breaches. The least likely is Germany at 14% and Australia at 17%. The U.S. is kind of somewhere in the middle, a little bit below the United Kingdom at 27%. That's how we construct a 1 in 4 chance. Next slide. So I think this, Megan, is a drum roll moment. What are the gigantic numbers here? What does it all mean? And in terms of global findings at a glance, the average total cost of a data breach, that's the cost of dealing with one data breach, averages about $4 million, $3.86 million to be exact. And that represents a 6.4% increase from last year. The per capita cost of the cost per compromised record is $148 per record, which represents a 4.8% increase from last year. And the average number of breaches that we studied is about 24,600, which is a 2.2% increase from last year. And then finally, the likelihood of a data breach on a recurring basis, a material data breach, is about 27.9%. Now, one thing is really important to explain. When we do our study of data breach cost, we use a method called activity-based costing. It's been around for ages. In fact, it was created by a professor by the name of Bob Kaplan at Carnegie Mellon University at the time. And in fact, he was my cost accounting professor, not to brag, but he wasn't the greatest teacher, but he was really very smart. I learned a lot from him. But the bottom line is, when you use this method, you basically have to define certain parameters. And one of the most important parameters is what we call the sweet spot for data breach. And we absolutely know from our research that data breaches come in all sizes. But when we look at some of these mega data breaches, it's still considered a very rare event. The likelihood of it occurring, even though it may not seem to be rare, is rare for for each company. So we do the model based on data breach that's between a low end of 1,000 records to a high end of 100,000 records. And so that average number of data breaches of 24,615 is within that cost constraint or size constraint that I just mentioned. Another important part of this slide, there's lots of information. The per record cost for the top 3 industries, $408 per compromised health record. That's healthcare providers. That's by far the highest cost, and from an industry perspective, followed by financial and then services. What's interesting, financial service organizations would include retail banks, insurance, brokers, brokerage, investment management, payment processors, and others. And of course, they're subject to the New York State law, by the way, which I know Deborah knows very well. But clearly, regulated industries like financial service companies tend to have a higher per capita or per compromised record cost. Okay, next slide. This is a beautiful graph. There's just a ton of information. Firstly, the arrows are red or orange, depending upon what kind of computer screen you have, but they're all moving up. And all these costs seem to move up from last year, but there are just a few moving down. Clearly, the big places where it's moved up, Germany, France, Italy, Canada, UK, US, Middle East, South Africa, all of these are moving up. There are only 2 country studies that have moved down where costs are decreasing, and that's Japan. Okay, and then over to, let's hunt for another blue. Oh, there it is, Brazil. So those are costs that have actually decreased. When you compare to last year there was more volatility, it's more volatile. Excuse me, a little tongue twister there. But it seems that now it seems to continue to be trending up, or necessarily not trending down in terms of global research findings.
And if you're interested in playing with these numbers, we launched a calculator that's interactive on the IBM security website. So if you search for 2018 cost of a data breach in Google and calculator, you should be able to find it. And I also have a link in this presentation, which hopefully we can send out to the audience. But that calculator will allow you to manipulate based on or filter by your location and industry and your own cost factors, just to see what the different numbers on the back end are and how that impacts them.
Thanks, Megan. And by the way, it is really cool. I think that calculator is, I am somewhat biased since we created it with IBM, but it's really, really a very, very cool thing.
I agree.
Okay, so now we talk about, global, of course, that's important, but what's happening in the United States? So we do a deeper dive here, and we could do a deeper dive pretty much for every country that we study. So if you're interested in one of the countries studied, we can do an analysis for you and be pleased to do it. Or if you wanted to do this by a region, we can do that as well. So all of this information is available in greater detail. But in terms of the average total cost of a data breach, a quiz question, what did we say before with 3.86 million? For the U.S., it's 7.91. It's nearly $8 million per incident. The average cost, which we said was $148 on average, is $233 in the United States. In both cases, that's a net increase. And the data breach size, on average, is about 31.4 thousand records, which is an increase in the prior year. And the average cost of lost business, which is part of the total cost, is about $4.2 million. And that includes things like customer goodwill, turnover, reputation damages, after the fact regulatory issues, and so forth. So again, a lot of this detail is spelled out in our research report. In terms of organizations with the highest abnormal churn, this is the percentage of people who change their pattern. They fire an organization that lost their data, or choose another organization to kind of fill in the blank or the gap. Financial services has the highest churn rate, followed by healthcare and pharmaceuticals. Again, heavily regulated organizations have a much higher abnormal churn following a material data breach. Okay. So again, and thinking about it from one visual, using a pie chart or a donut graph, we basically see the 3.86 million is divided into four broad categories. By the way, if you're interested in knowing the categories that we have in total, because it's kind of like a bottom-up approach in our activity-based costing model, it basically is about 188 different cost categories. So the lost business represents $1.4 million of the total, which is the largest segment, followed by detection and escalation costs, followed by post-breach response costs, and the tiniest sliver is notification. The reason for that, by the way, is that U.S. companies are subject to notification in most states, in fact, probably all states by now, except for one or two. That's not true in other parts of the world. It will soon be true with the new law in Europe, the European Union. The general data privacy regulation will actually require notification, but until now, it's really been predominantly a U.S. cost, very, very small costs in other countries. Next slide. This slide we prepared briefly since we're talking about public sector organizations, because this is probably the sweet spot that you're most interested in hearing. Of the total sample, 32 companies, organizations are public sector organizations, which represents just shy of 7% of the total benchmark sample. The per capita cost for public sector organizations is much lower at $75 per compromised record, and the total average cost for public sector is $2.3 million. Top factors that decrease breach costs for public sector organizations: the extensive use of encryption, which is really smart, formation of an IR team, and then employee training. The top factors that increase data breach costs for public sectors is third-party involvement in the breach. In other words, the third party was part of the problem. Compliance failure, and then extensive cloud migration. By the way, if you're interested in the report, we actually showed 22 different factors this year. This is just a subset. And these are the factors I would say are the most important, but there are other very important factors as well. The mean time to identify the breach for our public sector organizations is 190 days. And then the mean time once it's identified to contain the breach is 57 days. So probably the number that you're thinking of is that $75 per compromised record seems pretty low, right? But it's not, because in the world of government or not-for-profit, you don't necessarily have churn in the way we think of it. It's, for example, I'm a veteran, and suppose I didn't like the Veterans Administration, I wanted another Veterans Administration, I'd be out of luck. There really isn't a need for more than one government organization called Veterans Department or whatever. And so the moral of the story is, because we don't have churn and we don't have a lot of these reputational impacts that we see with other industries. And so it is $75. It's not chump change. It's still pretty significant, but it's not as significant as some of the other industries that we studied. Next slide. Now, when we think about root causes of a data breach, we think about it very broadly. There are many, many root causes, probably maybe more than 100 root causes that we can cite based on Ponemon research over the many years. But broadly, there are really four big high-level root causes. One is the malicious or criminal attacker, which represents about 48% of our data breach cases. System glitch at 25%, which is a system or business process failure. It's not attributable to bad guys. It's usually good people who make mistakes, and that's also human error. The difference between a glitch and human error is usually attributable to a person. A system glitch is normally something you look at as a process or technology failure or something to that effect, but not malicious or criminal. What's important is, if you think about the per capita record, when there's a criminal attack, criminals are harder to detect and it's harder to contain, and therefore the per record cost is $157 on average. Remember, the overall average is $148. System like
Dr. Ponemon, I think your audio is kind of breaking in and out. I don't know, Megan, if you could take over for a second while we get that figured out.
Sure.
Thank you. I'll call right back. Thank you.
Okay, so he'll call back in. So I can pick up approximately where he left off. He was mentioning that you might ask what the difference is between a system glitch, which is approximately, or is 25% of the total, and human error. And the definition that Dr. Ponemon uses for this research is that human error is a problem that can be traced to an individual or a group of people. One example is a person who unwittingly opens a phishing email and introduces malware into the network. And a system glitch, by comparison, is something that breaks down in an IT system or a business process that can't be linked back to an individual or a group.
And I'm here.
Oh,
back.
Great. Thank
Yay.
you. That was very quick.
No,
So Dr. Ponemon, I think I cleared this chart for you. You had pretty much done all of it, but I went into what the difference between a system glitch and human error is. So is there anything else you'd like to say about this chart?
Just want to say thank you for being so brilliant. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
Go to our next slide. I'm now on another phone. Hopefully this works. Okay. Another variable that we look at very closely in our cost of data breach is this whole idea of mean time to identify, summarized as MTTI, and the mean time to contain, as the MTTC. The mean time to identify is the time it takes to detect an incident that occurred. So basically, it takes on average a fair amount of time in some cases to determine that you in fact had a data breach. And then once you identify, it's the mean time to contain, making sure that all of the problems associated with that breach event are managed down so that you basically, you're not currently dealing with cleanup constantly. And so these two variables are really important in our study and other studies as well. So if you think about the cost, again, remember the total cost we looked at before. If the mean time to identify is less than 100 days, you basically are looking at $3.11 million. And I'm looking at the 2018 data points. That's the blue bar versus the black bar. If it's over 100 days, it's $4.21 million. The difference, right, between 4.21 and 3.11, more than $1 million, and that consider that like an incremental saving as a result of being more efficient in identification. And if you look at the pattern, the black bar is just simply last year. The pattern is, the numbers are different, but the pattern is exactly the same. Similarly, if we look at the mean time to contain, for organizations that can contain the data breach in less than 30 days, incremental analysis gives us a $3.09 million cost, overall cost. MTTC greater than 30 days gives us an incremental of $4.25 million. So if you're trying to reduce data breach costs, it starts by being better at identifying the incident and obviously containing the incident. Some of these numbers go on for years in some cases, and you don't want to be in that situation. Clearly, there's a cost increase associated with being late, just not recovering in an appropriate way. Next slide.
New this year, we have Dr. Ponemon introduced research on the impact of security automation. He examined the effective security automation tools, which use artificial intelligence, machine learning, analytics, and orchestration to augment or replace human intervention in the identification and containment of a breach.
Well, thank you very much, Megan. So what we did is we wanted to find out first, what's the state of security automation for the 477 companies that participated in our research. And the numbers aren't large as yet. Fully deployed is at 15%. That means that the company had at least one AI, one task that was fully automated, but not across the enterprise, maybe more as a point solution. Fully deployed means across the enterprise, that's 15%. Partially deployed, at least one application at 34%. Plan to deploy, so we haven't deployed it yet, but we plan to do it in the next 24 months, 38%. Not deployed at all at 13%. It's really a very interesting pattern. So fully deployed is only 15%, but over the next 2 years, it's going to be the vast majority of these companies, assuming their prediction is correct, will in fact be using advanced security automation technologies. Now, what's the cost impact? The cost impact if fully deployed is $2.88 million. If not deployed at all is $4.43 million, and kind of the mean here is $3.39 million. That means partially deployed. So clearly, deployment results in an incremental decrease in total cost of the data breach. And that's really what we're showing here. But keep in mind that the fully deployed is a very small percentage. I think it's only about 68% of the cases out of the 477. Okay, next slide. So this is really, I think, it is probably my favorite slide. This is really important because it covers a lot of information. So one of the questions that you probably should be asking yourself, whether you're in government or whether you're in the private sector, what can you do to help reduce the cost of a data breach? And so what we do is we look at these costs. These are reductions in the per capita or per record cost of a data breach. Having a well-defined incident response team gives you $14 off that $148 savings. That's a chunk of good savings if you multiply that by the number of records that are compromised. It could be a big number. Number two, the extensive use of encryption. Number three, BCM, which is business continuity involvement, or DR in business continuity involvement. Employee training, participation in threat sharing, artificial intelligence platform, use of security analytics, extensive use of DLP, board level involvement, CISO appointment, data classification in place, insurance protection, so basically cyber insurance or whatever you want to call it, data breach insurance, and then the appointment of a CPO, which is a Chief Privacy Officer. So all of these things, obviously it's vary, but all of these things is actually leading to a reduction in cost savings. So I think that is a very cool finding. Next slide.
Yeah, so also new this year was a closer look at the impact of a mega breach. In the past 5 years, the number of mega breaches, which we define as breaches of more than 1 million records, has nearly doubled from just 9 mega breaches in 2013 to 16 mega breaches in 2017. Due to the small count of mega breaches in the past, the cost of a data breach study historically analyzed data breaches of between 2,500 to 100,000 lost records. So Dr. Ponemon, tell us a little bit more about what you found regarding the impact of a mega breach.
Right. So what we found is that, firstly, keep in mind this warning, the sample size that we used for the megadata breaches was very small. In fact, 11 companies that all had at least 1 million or more records. But to protect the identity of these participating companies is tough when you have such a small population, but we try to do that. Clearly, as we get more information, which we are getting more information this year than we had last year, some of these numbers and patterns may change a little. But we also use Monte Carlo simulation. You probably know what that is, folks, but it allows us to fill in the gaps, and there are different ways of doing it. And fortunately, we have good people on our staff because it's very complex stuff. But the average total cost of a megadata breach, which is a 1 million or more compromised record, if you have 1 million records, we estimate it at about $40 per record. Remember, we're dealing with $148 as an average when we specify the sample, the breach size between 2,500 and 100,000. So it's $39 or $40 per record. Notice it actually goes down in terms of the total cost from 39.49 to 147 at 2 million. As you look at the graph, when you get to about 50 million, things start to flatten out in our model. So whether you have 50 million or 150 million, God forbid, you basically are dealing, with a certain cost that doesn't change all that much. And that's because, accounting, the fixed cost portion or the semi-fixed cost is spread out over, a number of variables, not just a small number. And by the way, the number that we'd be looking at 50 million is about $350 million of cost. And that is not chump change. Even if you're a Fortune 100 company, that's likely to give you a little bit of nightmare if you're the CEO. So anyway, next slide.
Well, and Dr. Ponemon, just a quick note, as I recall from the study, we found that when you surpass 50 million records, that the cost did level out at 350 million. So I guess that's the good news, is there is a maximum, or it does plateau eventually at 350 million.
Right, it's a good point, because people mostly would say, when will there ever be a data breach with more than 50 million? And I could say, let's see, Equifax, and Facebook, and suddenly it's not one or two, but more than 10. But it does flatten out. It's a parabolic curve, and when it gets to about $350 million, the incremental cost increase is negligible. So it kind of looks like it flattens out completely at that point. So there are really 6 key takeaways from this research. Clearly, number one, lost business, which is the churn factor that I just briefly mentioned, which people who lose their faith and trust in the organization that loses their data. Does vary by regulatory. Banks, for example, are particularly susceptible to a high churn, but lost business is the biggest financial consequence of a data breach. Number 2, a proactive approach to incident response could significantly reduce cost and impact of a breach. So having an IR team in place that's well defined, well functioning, will actually result in cost decreases. It will pay for itself. Disruptive technologies like cloud and mobile and IoT and complexity and all these different factors are all driving costs to increase. And we have to deal with the disruptive technologies. Things like IoT are really good to society as a whole, I think, but basically they can pose this huge security and data breach risk. Having the right skills, the right expertise and knowledge outsourced, consultants, hiring consultants, or a combination of the two is really important. And basically communicating and working with the C-suite, because data breach, when we're dealing with big data breaches of hundreds of millions of dollars, potentially, or tens of thousands of dollars, it becomes a C-level issue. And so it's important that you work with your executives and maybe even the boards of directors of companies to make sure they understand what has happened and how to minimize the cost impact. Investing in security technologies such as advanced analytics, SIM, encryption, and many others can help prevent breaches as well as reduce total costs. And I use this word a lot because it is so important to what we do in security. Deborah knows this firsthand, is visibility. Visibility across the incident life cycle is critical. Identifying threats, prioritizing our response, and identifying the data that's at risk. Not having that visibility makes it very difficult to be proactive and manage only cost of a data breach.
And so to close this out, of course, I'm going to give my marketing plug. If you're interested in learning more about the overall report and looking for ways to locate it, you can go to ibm.com/security/data-breach. And that's where you can find the report to register and download. You can try out the calculator I mentioned earlier. And we also have a self-assessment where you can just enter some different variables, answer some questions, and get a high-level result for what your security posture is. And then, of course, we have our ibm.com/security/services site to learn about how IBM Security Services can help in your journey to reduce impact of and exposure to a data breach. And that's it for me. Thank you.
All right, Megan, you guys can, if folks on the webinar have questions, you can type those into the chat box. That's how we'll be taking questions today. But I have one, if you'll indulge me. I'm interested in, new this year, you studied security automation. And, every year we ask state CIOs some different questions. And this one we asked them about which emerging IT area will be the most impactful over the next 3 to 5 years, and AI and machine learning was the #1. So any additional insight that you can share? I know that, states obviously aren't fully deployed with security automation, but a lot are or have tried it. Any other insights you can share on that?
Sure. Megan, would you like to start and I can follow up? Would you like for me to?
I think, Dr. Ponemon, I'll turn this over to you since you're the true expert and our futurist.
Thank you. The technology, I can't make it work here. But the bottom line is that we see that too, what you just said, that CISOs and CIOs and CTOs and other executive level folks working in corporate IT, the C automation, and more specifically AI and machine learning is really, really important technologies. And we basically know that a lot of vendors, the vendor community, are taking their existing technologies and they're building in ML or machine learning and AI or drawing upon AI platforms. So it's all good. The evidence suggests that the companies that automate, we did show some of the numbers very briefly, are basically going to see a cost savings. Now, there's a myth though about these costs. The general view is that these technologies make us better at doing security and data protection and even privacy, but it will not replace people. It's not going to be like you can either have 4 humans versus 1 robot. It's not going to work that way. It seems that it's going to basically result in maybe the same head count, but greater efficiency vis-a-vis the use of AI and machine learning as a tool. So it's evolving pretty quickly. And even though we only show, I think, 12% of our sample, we're using one application of machine learning, artificial intelligence. The reality is that number every day is creeping up. And it's not just this study, but other Ponemon studies that we've conducted on the topic. A great question and much appreciated.
Megan, can you see the other questions that have come in, or do you want me to read those? I'm happy to.
I don't. Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm just seeing the panel where I can see them.
That's okay. No worries.
Oh, okay. I do see from Craig. What is the public sector sample size and what is their nature? Dr. Ponemon, do you know that off the top of your head?
Right, I think the number was, and I should know it right off the top of my head, but let's go back to the one slide about public sector, and it's somewhere like in the middle. No, that's not giving me a lot of information, but I think we had the exact stat. occurred?
I think it was 9 or 11. There we go.
Here we go. Okay, 32 public sector organizations globally, which means it's really not a huge sample of organizations. But we collect, remember, the unit of analysis is an organization. We might have as many as 20 interviews in some cases in order to collect the information that we need. We actually capture quite a bit of information. The public sector organizations that we studied are mostly government, state, or in the U.S. it would be federal and central government and for non-U.S. organizations, but also other public sector organizations would be included. Like, for example, the U.S. Postal Service, hypothetically, could fall into that category. An enterprise.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Ponemon. The other question we received is, if lost business is the biggest financial consequence from a breach, what is the major consequence for state government?
Right. So the categories that are most significant would be detection and escalation, but basically having to properly detect and get all the information that you need about the breach, and then escalating it to the powers that be within an organization, including a lateral escalation to different units that should be involved, like getting, if you have the business continuity management group or DR group, getting those people involved. Those activities in general can be fairly costly. The notification cost, by the way, would not be just notification alone. It would include communication to regulators, this regulatory issue, and other stakeholders as well. And of course, when you have a data breach and it's government, even if you have this monopoly issue that we're talking about, doesn't mean there isn't a reputation hit. You know, we did some work with, I don't want to pick on it, it's public knowledge, but South Carolina had a data breach in a few of its departments. And there was potentially a reputation issue. It was handled beautifully, by the way. They did a great job in communicating. But clearly, they recognized the cost. Biggest cost was reputation damage, which may not result in turnover, but change the way people interact with government. For example, in one study we did of the Veterans Administration, again, public record, we basically saw that people who were in a data breach were less likely to use self-service models and go back to more conventional ways of communicating, with the VA. So it's not exactly churn, but it has the same characteristics as churn in some respects.
Great, thank you. And those were the 2 questions we received. Are there, maybe give it another minute for anyone who wants to ask another question, or we could wrap it up, whatever you guys think.
Well, I think, Megan, unless one pops up while I'm talking, and you never know, sometimes I'm long-winded, it could happen. Great webinar today. Definitely held my attention. I loved hearing about it. Thanks for indulging my question about security automation. I think that's something that's real interesting. And someone asked if we could put the second slide up for a few seconds. Yes, and just so you guys know, the slides will be available after the webinar, and the full broadcast will be available on NASCIO's website. So if you have colleagues that didn't get a chance today to sit in on the webinar, or if you want to watch it again, you'll be able to do that. And so that link will be sent out to you at the conclusion of the webinar. So Deb, Larry, Megan, everybody, thank you so much. Again, great webinar. I encourage everybody on the phone, you can register for our 5th and final webinar. Go to nascio.org/cyber series. But I think that is about it. So again, thank you guys so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for letting us
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.